On August 16, 2025, Khamzat Chimaev walked into the octagon against middleweight champion Dricus du Plessis, and what followed was complete domination. Record-breaking strikes, 21 minutes of ground control, and even mid-fight conversations that left fans stunned. But that wasn't the whole story, because beyond the cage, the drama was even bigger. So let's start from the beginning and unpack how UFC 319 turned from a normal fight week into one of the most chaotic and controversial events we've seen in years. From the very first second, Chimaev showed he was on a completely different level. I'm talking about literally seconds after the opening bell rang. While most fighters are still feeling each other out, Chimaev had already taken du Plessis down to the mat. What happened next was something you rarely see in championship fights. Chimaev didn't just control the position, he completely dominated it. He was landing elbows, throwing punches, and here's where it gets really interesting. He was having full conversations while doing it. At the post-fight press conference, reporters obviously wanted to know what Chimaev was saying during the fight. His answer was both hilarious and terrifying at the same time. He said, "I just spoke with him, spoke with his coach in the middle of the fight. I said, good job, work harder. Guys, can you imagine being Dricus du Plessis in that moment? You're getting dominated, you're eating elbows from the crucifix position, and your opponent is casually giving you motivational advice like he's your personal trainer. The level of confidence and control that takes is just insane." This conversation happened during the second round when Chimaev had du Plessis in one of the worst positions you can be in, the crucifix. For those who don't know, the crucifix position is when one fighter controls both arms of their opponent while being on top. It's basically a nightmare scenario because you can't defend yourself properly, and your opponent can rain down strikes almost freely. Now let's talk about the numbers, because they're absolutely mind-blowing. According to the official UFC fight statistics, Khamzat Chimaev controlled the fight on the ground for 21 minutes and 40 seconds. That's almost the entire fight. In a 5-round championship bout, that level of ground control is unprecedented. But wait, it gets even more incredible. Chimaev set a brand new UFC record that night. He threw and landed 529 total strikes in a single fight. To put that in perspective, most fighters are happy if they land 100 significant strikes in an entire fight. Chimaev nearly threw 6 times that amount. This record-breaking performance wasn't just about quantity either. The quality of strikes was there too. He was precise, he was powerful, and he never seemed to get tired. It was like watching a fighter in a video game with unlimited stamina. When the final bell rang, there was no question about who won. The judges scored the fight 50-44 in favor of Chimaev. For those keeping track, that means at least one judge gave du Plessis only 1 round out of 5. And that's being generous. It was a complete shutout performance. The moment Chimaev was announced as the new middleweight champion, something really special happened. Right there in the octagon, immediately after the fight, his head coach presented him with his jiu-jitsu black belt. This wasn't planned for later at the gym or at some ceremony. This happened right in front of thousands of fans and millions watching at home. Getting your black belt in Brazilian jiu-jitsu is a huge achievement for any martial artist. It typically takes 8 to 12 years of consistent training to reach that level. To receive it right after becoming UFC champion, in the cage where you just dominated a title fight, must have been an incredible moment for Chimaev. This also explains a lot about his ground game performance. His grappling was so advanced that he made a championship-level fighter look like a beginner. The way he controlled positions, transitioned between different holds, and maintained dominance for over 20 minutes. It all makes sense when you realize he's operating at black belt level, but the drama at UFC 319 didn't start when the fighters entered the octagon. The real fireworks began 2 days before the event at the pre-fight press conference on August 14th. This is where we saw a side of Khamzat Chimaev that not many people talk about, his loyalty to his teammates. During the media session, there was this journalist named Eric Nolan who decided to take a shot at one of Chimaev's training partners, a young Russian fighter named Bisangur Suzukaev. Now, Suzukaev had just earned his UFC contract on Dana White's Contender Series just 4 days earlier with a brutal first-round knockout. For those who don't follow the Contender Series, it's basically a weekly show where up-and-coming fighters get a chance to impress Dana White and potentially earn a UFC contract. Suzukaev had done exactly that by landing a devastating body kick that dropped Murtaza Talha Ali and forced him to quit from the pain. It was one of those finishes that makes you wince just watching it. So this kid, Suzukaev, had just achieved his dream of getting into the UFC, and he was helping Chimaev prepare for the biggest fight of his career. He should have been riding high on success and positive energy, but then Eric Nolan decided to be disrespectful. During the press conference, Nolan made a comment that crossed the line. He said, and I'm cleaning this up a bit for YouTube, "I know he is Khamzat Chimaev's little buddy, but he is not Khamzat Chimaev." Now you have to understand the context here. Nolan was scheduled to fight Suzukaev on the UFC 319 undercard. This wasn't just trash talk between opponents. This was a veteran journalist trying to belittle a young fighter who had just achieved something incredible. Chimaev's response was immediate and fierce. He didn't hesitate for even a second. He stood up and said, "He is better than me, bruh. He will knock you out, don't panic." The crowd went absolutely wild. You could hear the cheers and excitement from the audience. This wasn't just Chimaev defending his teammate. This was a championship-level fighter putting his reputation on the line for someone he believed in. What made this moment so powerful was that Chimaev didn't just defend Suzukaev. He actually said the kid was better than him. Coming from someone who was about to fight for a UFC title, that's an incredible endorsement. It shows the level of respect and belief he has in his training partner. This exchange completely changed the dynamic for the Suzukaev versus Nolan fight. What was supposed to be a relatively quiet preliminary card bout suddenly became one of the most anticipated fights on the entire card. Fans were excited to see if the young Russian could back up Chimaev's bold claims. The whole situation also showed us something important about Chimaev's character. Despite being focused on the biggest fight of his career, he took time to stand up for his teammate. That's the kind of loyalty that creates strong teams and lasting friendships in this sport. Now let's talk about Bisangur Suzukaev's incredible journey to the UFC, because his story is pretty inspiring. This young Russian fighter had been grinding for years trying to get noticed by the UFC. Like thousands of other fighters around the world, he dreamed of competing in the biggest MMA organization on the planet. His chance finally came on August 12, 2025, during Season 9 of Dana White's Contender Series in Las Vegas. The Contender Series is brutal. You get one fight to impress Dana White and the UFC matchmakers. If you win in spectacular fashion, you might get a contract. If you don't, you go back to the regional scene and hope for another opportunity that might never come. Suzukaev was matched up against Murtaza Talha Ali, and he knew this was his moment. Everything he had worked for came down to this one fight in front of Dana White and the UFC executives. What happened next was the kind of finish that highlights are made of. Suzukaev landed a perfectly timed body kick that hit Ali right in the liver. Now, if you've never been hit with a good body shot, let me tell you, it's one of the most painful experiences in combat sports. It's not just pain, it's a whole body shutdown that you can't fight through with willpower. Ali immediately dropped to the ground in agony. He was done. He couldn't continue and the fight was over in the first round. It was such a clean, devastating finish that Dana White had no choice but to offer Suzukaev a UFC contract on the spot. But here's what makes Suzukaev's story even better. Instead of taking time to celebrate his UFC contract, he immediately went to help Khamzat Chimaev prepare for UFC 319. This kid had just achieved his biggest career goal, and his first thought was to help his teammate get ready for a title fight. This tells you everything about the kind of training environment Chimaev has built around himself. These aren't just training partners, they're a real team that supports each other through everything. When one person succeeds, they all succeed. Suzukaev's role in Chimaev's training camp was apparently significant enough that he was sitting close to the action during the press conference. That's where he became a target for Eric Nolan's trash talk, and ultimately, where Chimaev's loyalty shined through. The timing of everything was perfect from a storytelling perspective. Suzukaev gets his UFC contract on Tuesday, helps Chimaev train all week, gets defended by Chimaev at the Thursday press conference, and then gets to fight on Saturday's card. It's like something out of a movie script. For a young fighter making his UFC debut, having that kind of endorsement from someone like Chimaev must have been incredible. Just when you thought UFC 319 couldn't get any crazier, the MMA gods decided to throw some last-minute chaos into the mix. Less than 48 hours before fight night, not one, but two fights got pulled from the card due to injuries. This kind of thing happens occasionally in MMA, but having two fights cancelled so close to the event is extremely rare. The first domino to fall was the lightweight bout between King Green and Diego Ferreira. King Green is a UFC veteran who's known for being tough and reliable. He's the kind of fighter who shows up ready to fight no matter what. So, when news broke that he was pulling out due to injury, people knew it had to be serious. Green didn't leave fans guessing about what happened. He posted an emotional and very raw Instagram story that really showed how devastating this was for him. He said, "I said I would never pull out of a fight. This one is different, I can't even walk." For a professional fighter to admit they can't walk, you know the injury is severe. These are guys who regularly compete with broken bones, torn muscles, and all kinds of damage. For Green to pull out, especially this close to the fight, shows just how serious his condition was. What made this even more heartbreaking was Green's admission that he had promised himself he would never pull out of a fight. Every fighter makes that vow at some point in their career. They tell themselves that no matter what happens, they'll find a way to compete. Breaking that promise, even for a legitimate reason, must have been incredibly difficult for him. Diego Ferreira's reaction to the cancellation showed real class and professionalism. Despite obviously being disappointed, he had been training hard for this fight and was ready to compete. Ferreira expressed understanding for Green's situation. He called Green a veteran and wished the cancellation had happened earlier in the process so they could have found a replacement. But wait, the chaos wasn't over yet. Just 3 hours after the Green-Ferreira fight was cancelled, another bout got pulled from the card. This time it was the welterweight finale of The Ultimate Fighter Season 33, featuring Rodrigo Cezinando and Daniil Dunchenko. The Ultimate Fighter finale fights are usually a big deal because they represent the culmination of an entire season of the reality show. Fans follow these fighters' journeys throughout the season, getting to know their personalities and watching them develop as athletes. The finale fight is supposed to be the payoff for all that investment. What made this cancellation even more mysterious was that the UFC didn't immediately announce which of the two fighters got injured. Unlike the Green situation, where we got a clear explanation, this one left fans guessing about what exactly happened and who was responsible for the cancellation. Despite all the last-minute changes and chaos, UFC 319 at the United Center in Chicago still delivered an incredible atmosphere. Chicago is one of those special MMA cities where the fans really know their stuff and bring serious energy to every event. The United Center itself is an iconic venue. This is where Michael Jordan and the Chicago Bulls dominated basketball in the 90s. It's where the Chicago Blackhawks have won Stanley Cup championships. When you add a UFC event to that history, you're creating something really special for fight fans. So what's next for the new middleweight champion Khamzat Chimaev? Well, Dana White dropped some interesting hints during the post-fight press conference in Chicago. According to White, Chimaev might return as soon as UFC 321 in Abu Dhabi, but only if his recovery goes smoothly and both sides agree to the short turnaround. UFC 321 in Abu Dhabi would be a perfect setting for Chimaev's first title defense. The UAE is his home country, so he'd have the home crowd advantage. Abu Dhabi has also become one of the UFC's premier international destinations, regularly hosting some of the biggest fights and most important events on the calendar. The quick turnaround would be unusual for a champion, especially after such a dominant but physically demanding performance. Most new champions take at least 4 to 6 months between title fights to properly recover, handle media obligations, and prepare for their next opponent. However, if anyone could handle a quick turnaround, it's probably Chimaev. His performance against Du Plessis was so dominant that he didn't take much damage. He controlled the fight from start to finish, which means he wasn't absorbing the kind of punishment that typically requires months of recovery. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to hit that like button And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more updates and deep dives into the fight world.